Gabriel's sharp gaze softened unexpectedly, catching me off guard. "As much as I want to break you two apart, I won't," he said, his voice calm, almost resigned. "I'm not here to do that. I just wanted to check on all of you, but it looks like you're much better than I thought." My mouth fell open. Had I heard him right? Was this some sort of trick? My heart raced even faster than when he had first walked through the door. I tried to read his face, but his expression was maddeningly neutral. Gabriel wasn't the kind of man to sugarcoat his words or play games. If he wanted to make his disapproval known, he would. But now, he was standing here, saying he wouldn't tear me and Grayson apart. My chest tightened, confusion swirling with a strange relief. You're serious," I managed to say, my voice cracking slightly. Before Gabriel could respond, Matthew, never one to stay silent, opened his mouth. She and I nearly... Panic shot through me like lightning. Without thinking, I slapped a hand over Matthew's mouth, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Don't mind him," I said quickly, forcing an awkward laugh that sounded more strained than I intended. "He's just hungry. Aren't you, Matt?" Matthew gave me a pointed look, his brows furrowing as if to say, "Really?" But thankfully he caught on quickly enough. I leaned closer to him, my smile tight. "Go on, Matt. Have breakfast. We'll join you in a bit." He hesitated for a moment longer, glancing between me and Gabriel, before finally relenting with a shrug. "Fine," he muttered, his tone begrudging. He shot me one last meaningful look before heading out of the room. The tension in the room felt a little lighter, as Matthew's footsteps receded down the hallway, but my heart was still pounding. I turned back to Gabriel, who was watching me closely, his brow slightly raised. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. "Perfectly fine," I lied, plastering on a smile. "Matthew's just... Matthew." Gabriel didn't look convinced, but he didn't push it either. I swallowed hard, the weight of the secret I was hiding from him pressing heavily on my chest. If Gabriel ever found out what had happened to Matthew and me, he'd drag me back to the UK without a second thought. And the thought of leaving Grayson, leaving us, was something I couldn't bear. The moment Gabriel turned to Ethan and asked him to leave, I felt my stomach twist. "Of course," Ethan said without hesitation, giving me a brief glance before stepping out and closing the door behind him. Gabriel's movements were slow and deliberate as he turned back to me. My heart raced, dread creeping up my spine as I wondered if he was about to take back everything he had just said in front of everyone. Was he going to try to convince me to leave Grayson after all? He leaned against the door for a moment, his sharp gaze locking on me. "Have a seat," he said, his voice calm but firm. I hesitated, my fingers fidgeting with the hem of my shirt before making my way to the bed. I perched at the edge, my body tense as Gabriel took his place on the couch, stretching his legs out in a deceptively relaxed posture. His eyes lingered on me, unreadable, as if he were weighing his words carefully. "Why are your pulses beating so fast?" he asked suddenly, tilting his head slightly. "Are you all right?" I swallowed hard, my hands gripping the edge of the bed. "Perfectly fine," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "I'm just worried about what you're about to tell me, and it better not be about..." "Grayson Anderson," Gabriel said, cutting me off. I blinked, my eyebrows shooting up in surprise. "Then what is it that you want to say that made you come all the way here, to the man's house you don't like?" Gabriel leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees as he studied me. The intensity in his gaze was unnerving, and I felt the weight of his unspoken words pressing down on me. "I came here for you," he said finally, his voice quieter but no less serious. "To see for myself if you're truly okay or you're just pretending." His words sent a wave of confusion through me, and I frowned, unsure of how to respond. Gabriel wasn't the type to be this straightforward with his emotions, and it caught me off guard. The sincerity in his tone made my chest tighten, and I struggled to find the right words. Gabriel, I know you don't trust him, but I'm not pretending. I love him. His expression softened, though his jaw still tensed slightly. That's what worries me, he admitted. But it's not my place to interfere. Not anymore. I came here to see you, not to break you two apart. The room felt heavy with his honesty, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. My lips parted, but no words came out, and Gabriel sighed, leaning back against the couch. I've seen enough to know that you're stronger than I gave you credit for, he said, his voice softer now. And that's all I wanted to confirm. I blinked at him, my heart racing for an entirely different reason now. Gabriel, of all people, wasn't here to fight me on my decisions or demand I leave Grayson. He was accepting it? Thank you, I said quietly, the words feeling strange but right as they left my lips. Gabriel gave a small nod, his features relaxing slightly. Don't thank me yet, he said, his tone almost teasing, though the weight in his eyes remained. Whatever else he wanted to say was cut off by a knock at the door. Ethan's voice filtered through, reminding us about breakfast, and Gabriel stood straightening his jacket. Let's go, he said, gesturing toward the door. I hesitated for a moment, still processing everything that had just transpired before rising to follow him. This wasn't the conversation I had expected, but it left me feeling hopeful. And that, I decided, was enough for now. As I opened the door, I found Grayson standing there, his hand mid-air as if he were about to knock. He froze for a moment before giving me a light smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Hey, I said softly, my voice laced with surprise. Hey, he replied, his gaze briefly meeting mine before shifting to Gabriel behind me. Can we have a word? Gabriel raised a brow but gave a curt nod, brushing past me to follow Grayson into his room. Curiosity, and maybe a touch of nosiness, got the better of me. I found myself tiptoeing toward the slightly ajar door. I leaned against it as quietly as I could, trying not to make a sound as their voices reached me. I'm meeting up with Florence and Skylar, Grayson was saying. I thought you might want to come with me. Gabriel's voice was sharp, his irritation evident. Why would I want to meet up with her? She and I don't need each other. There was a pause before Grayson spoke again, his tone more measured. All right then. I just thought you'd want to meet her, seeing as she's your aunt, thinking you... My hand moved before I could stop myself, pushing the door open. Both men turned to me, their eyes wide with shock. Whose aunt are you talking about? I asked, my voice rising slightly. I heard Florence's name. Grayson opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't looking at him anymore. My gaze darted to Gabriel, my heart pounding as I pieced together what I had just heard. Is what I heard true? I demanded, my tone sharper now. That woman, Florence, how is she our aunt? Gabriel's face hardened, his usual stoic mask slipping ever so slightly. Ariana. Don't Ariana me, I interrupted, my voice sharp. You've been keeping this from me, both of you. Grayson sighed, running a hand through his hair as he exchanged a look with Gabriel. Whatever silent conversation passed between them only made my frustration grow. Someone better start talking, I said, crossing my arms, my gaze fixed firmly on Gabriel. Gabriel ran a hand down his face, muttering a curse under his breath before looking at me. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but here. Grayson cleared his throat, his eyes darting between the two of us. I will give you guys a moment. Ariana, this isn't how I wanted you to find out, Gabriel said. How exactly? I snapped. That the woman who practically despises me is somehow related to me. She's not just related to you. She's our aunt, our mother's sister, Gabriel said, his voice low and laced with frustration. The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I staggered slightly before walking to the bed, my legs feeling like jelly beneath me. I sat down heavily, my head spinning. Raking my hands through my hair, I tried to steady myself, but the weight of what I'd just learned was too much. Lifting my eyes to Gabriel, I forced myself to speak. "Were you planning to keep me in the dark?" My voice was shaky but edged with hurt. "Does Ethan know? Does Matthew know?" Gabriel's expression remained stoic as he nodded. "Ethan do." I let out a bitter chuckle, shaking my head in disbelief. "Wow," I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "Am I even a real member of your family? Because it sure doesn't feel like it. How is it that Grayson knows about this when I don't?" Gabriel opened his mouth to reply, but I didn't give him the chance. "Okay, for Grayson, I understand," I continued, my voice rising with every word. "He's an ass mafia boss with all the power and resources to do background checks on anyone. Of course he'd know. But you, Gabriel?" I pointed a trembling finger at him, my voice breaking. "You're my brother. My brother. How could you keep something like this from me?" I exhaled deeply, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Raising a hand, I stopped Gabriel from responding. "No," I said firmly. "I don't want excuses. I want the full story, from A to Z, and don't you dare leave anything out." The tension in the car was thick enough to cut with a knife. Grayson drove in silence, his grip on the steering wheel firm. Gabriel sat in the passenger seat, his usual stoic demeanour intact. In the back, Ethan on my left stared out the window, while Matthew on my right leaned back, his eyes darting between me and the others. I couldn't sit still, my thoughts spinning wildly after everything Gabriel had told me. Florence, our aunt, Skylar, her daughter. And yet I still had questions Gabriel hadn't fully answered. Unable to stay silent any longer, I leaned forward, poking my head between the front seats. My eyes fixed on Gabriel. "Are you absolutely sure you had no clue that Skylar was her daughter?" Gabriel sighed, his expression as unreadable as ever. "No, Ariana," he said firmly. "I didn't." I looked ahead at the road, my mind spinning. Then, almost involuntarily, my gaze flicked back to Gabriel. "But why does she look so much like—" My voice trailed off before I blurted, "Like we're twins. No, I take that back. If we were twins, which by the way I wouldn't like, I'd have felt some sort of connection to her. But I never did." Before I could press further, Matthew reached forward and gently pulled me back into my seat, his hand firm on my shoulder. "Ari, can you just be patient for once?" he said, exasperation lacing his tone. "We're meeting up with her. She'll tell us the truth, whether that Skylar woman is also our sister or not. God forbid." I crossed my arms, staring out the window as I chewed on his words. Patience had never been my strong suit, but Matthew had a point. Still, the idea of Florence being my aunt and Skylar possibly being my sister made my stomach twist. After what felt like an eternity, Grayson turned off the main road and pulled into an underground parking lot beneath a certain hotel. The hum of the engine echoed off the concrete walls as he found a secluded spot and parked. "Everyone out," Grayson said curtly, stepping out of the car and shutting the door behind him. We followed suit, the air in the underground lot cool. The sound of our footsteps reverberated as we headed toward the elevator. Gabriel pressed the button for the top floor, and the ride up was filled with a tense silence, save for the occasional sigh from Ethan. When the elevator doors opened, we stepped into a private corridor. Grayson led the way, his posture rigid until we reached a set of double doors. He opened them without knocking, revealing a spacious suite. Inside, Florence and Skylar sat on a plush couch, their expressions unreadable. Two towering men stood on either side of the room, their presence imposing. I jolted at the sight of them, my heart skipping a beat. Florence's sharp gaze locked onto me immediately, her expression unreadable, while Skylar shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Grayson turned to his men, his tone authoritative. "Wait outside. Without hesitation, the guards filed out, leaving the room cloaked in an uneasy silence. Grayson shut the door behind us and leaned against it, his gaze sweeping over the room as if assessing a battlefield. I stepped forward, my heart pounding as I looked between Florence and Skylar. The weight of their presence, coupled with the swirling questions in my mind, made it hard to breathe. "All right," I said, my voice trembling slightly but steady enough. "Someone start talking." The room remained charged with tension, each second feeling heavier than the last. Florence stood abruptly. Skylar, startled, stood as well but clung tightly behind Florence's back, her nervous energy palpable. Florence's gaze swept over us, her lips tightening before she finally spoke, her tone dismissive. "Seeing you all here tells me you want to know if my daughter might be your mother's daughter too. But let's clear this up now. Skylar is my daughter." A collective intake of breath from me and my brothers was audible, but Florence didn't pause for long. Her focus shifted, her piercing gaze landing on Grayson. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice softer but still resolute. "I owe you an apology for keeping you in lies all this time. I had my reasons, ones I cannot and will not share. I'd like to leave it at that." She turned back to us, her expression unreadable. "I got pregnant and gave birth to my daughter through IVF, using my own eggs and a donor. But what I didn't know then, and discovered later, was that the donor was your mother. She did it out of guilt," Florence continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Thinking that maybe it would make me happy. And it would have, except I found out soon after that she had also given birth. And then I saw her newborn. You. I saw how you looked so much like Skylar. The anger and resentment I'd buried resurfaced." Florence's hands clenched into fists as her voice grew cold. "And since it was her fault I couldn't have children like a normal woman to begin with, I told her to abandon you all. And as stupid as she was, she did. But then I thought it was only fair after what she did to me." Her voice broke slightly, but she quickly composed herself. "But then, like a storm in the hot desert, you showed up, and every time I looked at you, your arrogance, your self-assuredness, I saw her, and I hated it." The room fell into an almost suffocating silence. Even Grayson seemed too stunned to speak. My voice, soft but quivering, broke through the heavy atmosphere. "What exactly did our mother do to you?" My eyes glistened with unshed tears. "What could she have done to make you tell her to leave her newborn, us?" Florence's expression darkened, her features hardening into an unreadable mask. "That," she said flatly, "is something I'll take to my grave. You wanted to know if my daughter is truly my daughter or not. Now you know." She straightened her shoulders, her gaze sweeping over all of us one last time, before turning her back, as if the conversation was over. My voice broke the silence, trembling but insistent. "So what happened to our mother? Do you know where she is? You must know because—" "She's dead." Florence's voice sliced through the air like a blade, cold and unyielding. "She died 8 years ago. She committed suicide." My legs buckled under the weight of the revelation. My vision blurred, the room spinning as my body staggered backwards. Before I could collapse to the ground, a pair of strong arms caught me. At this moment, I couldn't tell whether it was Grayson or one of my brothers, but the steadying grip kept me upright. "Ariana," the voice whispered, but I couldn't place it. My chest heaved, the suffocating weight of Florence's words crushing me until Ethan stepped forward, his face contorted in fury and disgust. "You're an evil, pathetic woman," he spat, his voice shaking with restrained rage. "The worst I've ever seen." Without waiting for a reply, he stormed out of the room, the door slamming shut behind him with an echo that seemed to reverberate through my chest. Matthew stood frozen for a moment, tears streaming down his face as he stared at Florence. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Even the devil himself wouldn't welcome you in hell. You deserve worse than that. He turned and followed Ethan, the sound of his quiet sobs trailing him as he disappeared through the doorway. The room was left in a thick, oppressive silence, the weight of all that she had said pressing down on each of us who remained. Florence stood unmoved, her expression cold and unreadable, while my tears finally began to fall. My body trembling in Grayson's arms, I now recognize. Gabriel, who had remained silent ever since we arrived, finally spoke, his voice firm but laced with exhaustion. I'm done here. Let's head out of here. Grayson slowly turned me to face him, his eyes softer than I expected as he spoke, his voice a low murmur. Head to the car with your brothers. I need a word with these two. It's gonna be brief. I nodded, wiping away the tears, feeling the ache in my chest intensify. Without another word, I followed Gabriel, my steps slow, the weight of everything bearing down on me. We met up with Ethan and Matthew, and I could see how strained Matthew's face was, his usual strong exterior breaking as tears streamed down his face. I didn't know what to say to him or to anyone, really. There were no words left. I crouched for a moment, feeling my head throb from the overwhelming emotions rushing through me. My thoughts swirled, and I couldn't stop the tears. It's my fault, I whispered, though no one could hear me. Before I could sink any further into despair, Gabriel's hand was on my shoulder, his grip strong and comforting. He lifted me gently, his words quiet but full of understanding. Come on, let's get you to the car. He led me down to the car, his hand steadying me as we made our way inside. It wasn't long before the car door opened again, and Grayson slipped in beside us, his gaze briefly flicking to me, then to my brothers. He kept his voice low, his tone soft. Are you all right? Gabriel nodded first, his voice flat. Just get us out of here. Grayson didn't argue, and the car began to move. The silence in the vehicle stretched on, broken only by the occasional sniffle or quiet sob. When we arrived back at the house, my legs were weak, my head pounding from crying. I barely registered Grayson's presence as I moved mechanically toward the stairs, not wanting to see anyone, not wanting to talk. My room was the only place that I wanted, and I needed to escape, if only for a moment. I didn't even bother to change out of my clothes as I sank onto the bed, curling up under the covers, the weight of guilt pressing down on me like a physical thing. My mother, my father, their deaths felt like they were all my fault. And my brothers, all the struggles they'd endured, the parts of their lives they had to sacrifice because of me. It was all too much to carry. I must have fallen asleep soon after, though I couldn't remember when. My mind was a blur, and sleep came like an escape. By the time I woke up, it was late at night. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of a bedside lamp. My head still throbbed, but it was a dull, persistent ache now, like the remnants of a storm that had passed. And then I noticed him. Grayson. He was sitting beside me, his eyes studying me quietly. I didn't know how long he'd been there, but his presence, calm and steady, seemed to settle the chaos inside me, just for a moment. How are you feeling? His voice was gentle, almost as if he didn't want to disturb the fragile peace that had settled in the room. I couldn't bring myself to answer immediately. My chest ached, my emotions still raw. Everything had changed in such a short amount of time, and I was struggling to come to terms with it all. I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat was dry and I didn't know what to say. What was there to say? Grayson's steady presence over the past few days had been a balm to my frayed emotions. He wasn't overly affectionate or smothering, but he stayed by my side in quiet solidarity, offering comfort in ways only he could. Whether it was the small gestures like ensuring I ate or sitting with me during my sleepless nights, his presence had become a lifeline. It was after one of those long, quiet nights with dawn breaking and spilling soft light into the room that I realized I was ready to let go of the past, or at least try. Clinging to the pain wouldn't change what had happened, and Grayson, in his own way, had shown me that moving forward was the only way to truly live. Grayson and I hadn't spoken much about Florence or Skylar since that explosive confrontation, but I knew he'd made his decision, prompted no doubt by my brothers. Gabriel had insisted he let them go, arguing that the cycle of anger and vengeance had to end somewhere. To my surprise, Grayson agreed, not because he forgave them, but because he understood that holding on to them would only deepen the wound. Today was the day Ethan and Gabriel were set to return to the UK. Matthew had decided to stay behind, choosing to continue with his studies here. As the car idled quietly in the driveway, I found myself standing between my brothers, wrapping my arms tightly around each of them, holding on as if letting go would make their departure more bearable. "I don't even know how to say thank you," I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. "You both mean the world to me. I hope you know that." Ethan, ever the stoic one, softened as he pulled me closer. "We'll always be here for you, Ariana, no matter what. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself." Gabriel, his usual seriousness melting for a moment, ruffled my hair gently. "And if your boyfriend gives you trouble, call me. I'll take the next flight out and straighten him out." I laughed softly, wiping away tears. "I promise." Grayson stood a few steps back, his hands in his pockets, watching us with an unreadable expression. When Ethan and Gabriel finally climbed into the car, he stepped forward and offered them both a firm nod. It was the closest he'd come to showing respect, and it meant more than words. I stood in the driveway, watching as Grayson's men drove them away and to the airport. My heart ached at their absence, but I knew they needed to return to their lives, just as I needed to start rebuilding mine. I turned away from the driveway, my heart heavy but hopeful, and wrapped my arms tightly around Grayson. His warmth enveloped me as he pulled me into a firm embrace. His lips brushed against the top of my head in a tender kiss, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in the past few days that felt endless. For a while we stood like that, letting the silence and closeness soothe the chaos that lingered within me. Finally, Grayson leaned back slightly, his hands resting on my arms as he looked into my eyes, his gaze filled with concern. "Are you all right, love?" he asked softly. I nodded, my lips curling into a small, genuine smile. "I am," I said, my voice steady. "With you. And of course, Matthew." I glanced toward the house where Matthew was practically skipping inside, a whistle on his lips and a spring in his step, as if he was the happiest man alive. A laugh bubbled out of me, light and free. "Look at him," I said, shaking my head in amusement. "He's so excited to start at that university." Grayson followed my gaze, a fond smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. His hand gently stroked my back as I turned my face toward him, my smile softening. "You just made his dream come true," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. "But I hear that university is very expensive. It can drain your bank account." Grayson let out a low chuckle, the sound warm and reassuring. "You shouldn't worry about that," he said, his tone laced with confidence. "Money isn't an issue for me. My only concern now is where to take you, to make your heart truly at ease after all the chaos." I looked up at him, my smile growing wider as I placed my hand over his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Wherever you take me, I'll go," I said, my voice filled with quiet certainty. "As long as I'm with you, my heart feels at ease." Grayson's lips curled into a sly smile as he reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. "All right," he said smoothly, his voice laced with charm. "I've got a few options for you. How about Bora Bora, Fiji, Turks and Caicos, or the Maldives?" My eyes widened in surprise, sparkling with excitement as I grabbed his arm. "You're fucking serious!" He grinned, leaning in closer. "So fucking serious," he said, his tone teasing but full of promise. "And we can stay for as long as you want." A rush of joy bubbled up inside me. "I don't have a problem with that," I said, my excitement spilling into my voice. But what about your other work? You have responsibilities, Grayson. He let out a low chuckle, his hand cupping my cheek. I don't lose anything by giving myself a break with my woman. You're my first priority now. Besides, I have professional employees who can take the lead in my absence. I blinked, overwhelmed by his certainty and unwavering focus on me. If you say so. All right, I'm not too familiar with the other options, but the Maldives? That's definitely a win. My excitement bubbled over as I grabbed his arms, practically bouncing on my toes. When are we going? I need to go shopping, I squealed, unable to contain myself. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I've seen that island on screens. How breathtaking it looks. And now I'm actually going to see it with my own eyes. It feels like a dream. Grayson's smile deepened as he drew me closer, his voice a low, velvety murmur. Then it settled. The Maldives, he said, his eyes locked on mine. Get ready, love. Your dream is about to become a reality. I tilted onto my toes, my pulse racing as I pressed my lips gently to his. But before I could pull away, his hands cupped my face, deepening the kiss. The warmth of his touch sent a wave of electricity through me, making my heart swell with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Every inch of my being felt alive, my thoughts spinning in a haze of emotion. I couldn't help but lose myself in him. His warmth, his strength, the way he made me feel like I was the only person in the world that mattered. With every beat of my heart, I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. No matter what challenges lay ahead, I would never leave his side. There was a certainty deep within me, a knowing that with him by my side, I would lead a life filled with purpose, love, and strength. And in the same breath, I was sure he felt the same way about me. Our lives intertwined, unshakable, a promise I was ready to fulfill. When we finally pulled apart, I rested my forehead against his, gazing up at him with a smile that reflected everything I was feeling. Hope, love, and the unwavering belief that our future was bright. I'm with you, I whispered, knowing that wherever life took us, it would always be better with him by my side.